Ready? Good morning, everyone. Say the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay.
What do we got here?
First on the agenda is agenda approval. Is there any changes?
I am not aware of any changes.
Thank you. Can I get a motion?
Also move.
Thank you, Shar. I guess I'll second it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passed. Public input. Have we got any public input today? Going once, going twice? We'll close public input and we'll move on to the consent agenda. Again, any changes or corrections? Hearing none, if I can get a motion?
I'll move.
Thank you, Tom. And a second?
Well, I will then.
Thank you, Shar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carried. Now we'll move on to employee recognition. We'll start off with Loretta Matson, payroll coordinator, is recognized for 35 years of service effective September 8th, 2022. Whew. And then there's Robin Hanson, payroll coordinator, began the full-time position on September 15th of 2022. Social services, we have Adam Bach, case aide, is recognized for 2+ years of service from February 24th of 2020 to September 23rd of 2022. Doesn't look like Adam is here. And solid waste, we have Daniel Marcel, certified attendant 1, began the full-time position on September 14th, 2022. I want to thank everybody. And we have a little recognition here for Loretta.
Are you going to,
Yes, I am.
after the fact or before?
I was hoping to go down and meet with her, that's why I've been waiting.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Okay, righty. I know I should have the agenda memorized. But next is highway and survey.
Good morning.
Morning.
Just one thing on the agenda for you today. Last week, we opened bids for Project SAP 029-599-010. This was the bridge replacement for Nevis Township going out to the island on Beltane. And we received three bids, one of which we had to reject for a discrepancy with the bid document requirements. So they are not listed. Did I list them on your deal? Maybe I did. Are they on there as a rejected? Yeah. And so left us with two, with Ryerson Construction Incorporated out of Bemidji being the low. The problem with this bid is that the engineer's estimate was $456,877. So it exceeded the engineer's estimate by 130%. Now, we kind of expected that it was going to exceed to some degree, but not this. And this is a project that was put together by a consultant. They do the estimate, and of course we do review the estimate, so it didn't appear out of line. And so with that estimate, then we make that application to the state for bridge bonding on a project like this. And so that's about what they had for bridge bonding. And then some of the engineering then is covered too. The only thing the township has to provide is $10,000 towards the engineering, $10,000 towards the construction. With this being such a big overrun or overbid, overestimate, if we were to proceed forward, the township would have to come up with the remaining dollars of that. So as you can imagine, $600,000. So I did send this stuff to the township which they will take up at their next meeting, which is not till the first Tuesday in October. So I guess what I'm asking for today, since it is such a large overage, would be to not award the project, and we'll do a contingent upon Nevis Township's decision at their board meeting. If they so choose to move forward, then I would bring it back to you for approval at that point, but it would be contingent upon their approval to not award.
And so Jed, why are you doing the boxcar, why are you doing this project?
So the bridge that's in place right now is a short timber bridge. And timber bridges, you know, well, any bridge has a limited life, but timbers are a little bit more limited. And so as this bridge gets inspected on an annual or a biannual basis, those ratings continue to drop over time. And so it gets to a point where it's eligible for bridge bonding and it needs to be replaced at some point. We don't have any major concerns over this bridge, but nonetheless, it needs to be in the works. And so when they went to a consultant, and the consultant puts a couple different options out there, the one that was chosen was this box culvert to replace it, which would have improved the navigability underneath that area, but nonetheless, it was a major change to that, and so yeah, it ended up being pretty expensive.
Plus, the box culvert isn't available now anyway.
That's why we ended up letting this project right now, but the construction was not planned for until after
Right.
Labor Day of next year, with paving the following year. A very unique deal for us. You usually don't end up in that situation, but, so that could have something to do with it, in that the contractors don't know exactly what's gonna happen in the next year to two. So it's a very tough deal. So I guess my advice to the township was, go ahead, review this at your board meeting, get back to us with how you want to proceed. But I think if they choose to not award the project as well, we need to go back to the consultant and look at some different options. Maybe the box culvert's not the best way to go about it, and it needs to be a bridge replacement. The bridge replacement presents problems with access to and from that island. When we have some year-round residents out there, I think there's like 15 to 20 residences, probably a handful of them that are year-round. So what do you do with them? I think like a timber bridge replacement is limited time for construction, a little bit different than what we typically do with like a concrete slab span or a beam span bridge. But nonetheless, there's gonna be some time that they will not be able to access that island. So, unique project, presents some issues, but that doesn't mean that you pay more than double. the ex-
So Jed,
expected cost.
the estimate that you get from the engineer and then the bids that you get from these companies, are they itemized so you can kind of pinpoint
Yeah.
what went wild?
Yep, they are, and I would say that in reviewing these bids, where we see the biggest discrepancy, in order to do this, they're gonna have to pound sheet piling and get a dry hole to work in. One of another unique aspect of this, they were gonna do half at a time with the box culvert. That's why the box culvert was chosen. You can do half at a time, keep traffic open on each side, but it's very, very narrow. And we also have a grade raise coming through there, which wasn't gonna be the easiest to work with. But that sheet piling, that along with a 14 by 14 box, each of the end sections that go out, which is actually composed of probably at least 4 sections on the ends, they're big tapered sections, they're 24 feet long. I think those 2 items, the sheet piling, which was probably figured into their mobilization costs, because there's not a specific item for it, along with the end sections, exceeded the estimate.
Okay,
We couldn't plan for that, I guess, so.
thank you. Alrighty, can we get a motion?
I'll move to approve the recommendation of the highway engineer contingent on Nevis Township's review.
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye, opposed? Motion carried.
You wanna give an update on 119 maybe?
Sure, yeah, just a couple items to update. Our County Road 16 project, Knife River Materials to complete all the final details. They had some pavement grinding and final cleanup to finish, and that's done now. On County Road 119, that project is tied, of course, with our County Road 82 resurfacing and a couple township projects. Apparently Knife River Materials is behind schedule with their other work due to weather circumstances and whatnot. So their start date has been postponed back to the 3rd of October, at which point in time they intend to move in and and move forward with the grading construction on 119, which I'm confident that, unless the weather's completely unforeseen, they should be able to complete that. And then we'll move forward with conditions if they're appropriate for paving and resurfacing the other roads as well, so.
Otherwise, not the worst thing to have the paving wait until the following year. Anytime you do a grading project, it's nice to get that base to go through a freeze-thaw cycle before you cover it up. So if we had to wait with the paving, not a huge deal, but if the weather looks good, the expectation is still to try and get it all completed.
All right.
That's where that corner's gonna be cut out?
Yep.
Big time, I didn't go down there, but
Well, it'll somewhat mimic the corner that's paved already. It should be a similar design to that, but it'll be a lot better and eventually be paved, easier to maintain. Gets real washboardy in there, and the trouble with those bigger curves is that the traffic, they just continually cut further and further and further, and then you're down in the bottom and you can't maintain that, and it gets very washboardy and unsafe. So this will be a big improvement.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have natural resource management.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First item on the agenda is a non-exclusive easement across tax forfeited land for Daniel and Michelle Berkey. This is kind of an interesting easement in that at one point in time, the county looked like it had tried to develop an easement on this land, and they actually had the township establish a cartway across a portion of their land, and it looks like the county had tried to create an easement across tax forfeited land, or extend that cartway across tax forfeited land, and for some reason, it never was recorded. So the survey work was all done, and so the only thing that left for us to do is to start granting individual easements as people need it. So requesting the approval of the easement across some tax forfeited land in Lakeport Township, Section 4. Value of the easement is about $1,185.
Alrighty. Dan makes a motion to approve. And is there a second?
Sure.
Dave?
So Chip, it looks like there's already an improved trail.
Yeah, there's already a road there, driveway to both those parcels there. And like I said, it looked like the county had at one point in time tried to establish a roadway through there, a public roadway, and for some reason it never got recorded. So this is our next option, is to.
When was that, or how long ago was that?
Pardon?
How long ago was that?
I'm trying to remember when the easements or the documents were put together. Right off the top of my head, I don't remember. I think it was maybe 15, 20 years ago or so.
Miles.
There was a motion and a second. There's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Second item on the agenda is also an easement to a business and private residence right off of Highway 200, again in Lakeport Township. Just a little smidgen of a piece that is on tax forfeited land. Total value of the easement is $100.
Towards Walker?
Pardon?
Towards Walker, or which?
Yeah, it's down towards Benedict area. Yep.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Dan.
I can second.
Thank you, Shar. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Next item on the agenda is the sale of a parcel of county fee land that the county acquired a number of years ago in order to try and clear title on some tax forfeited land. There was a barn that was half on tax forfeited parcel and half on some private land, so we purchased enough so the barn was entirely on tax forfeited land, or would be on tax forfeited land. Sold the tax forfeited land, and the buyers never ended up buying the sliver that we acquired. And we've gone through several iterations of this with different owners, and the original owner is now owner of the piece, the parcel of tax forfeited land that we sold. So we're trying to get this back to them, so they're in a position where they're willing to buy it for what we bought it for back about 6 years ago. So we're recommending that we sell this parcel directly to Catherine Ewald Connor and her husband Joseph Connor.
And this is the sliver that's just north of Besida.
Correct, just north of the beside bar, yeah.
Alrighty. I'll make the motion to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Next item on the agenda is the parcels for our upcoming October 10th timber auction. We have 12 tracks that we have set up. It has 8,035 cords of timber covering 559.16 acres. And the appraised value of the timber at this moment is $220,713.61. And I do apologize for the kind of the geometric shapes that you see in the map. I don't know what's going on there. Our software program decided to throw in some funky background colors there, so we're looking into that and seeing what's causing that, but that's when I printed the maps out, this is what we got, so.
With some of the shapes of these sales, is it easy to define the boundary lines when you're out in the woods, or?
Yeah, our boundaries are either painted, or they follow natural boundaries such as wetlands, forest trails, cut over areas, stuff like that. But, the sale boundaries are pretty well indicated. I typically will mark all of my boundaries just so there is no confusion.
Okay, thank you.
I noticed that you took off on each timber sale, the regeneration plans on them. And, being interested in forestry, I'd like to be able to see how it's going to be regenerated. I guess it'd be a moot point if I don't get reelected, but if I am, I'd kind of like to see, what's going to be happening to the track
Okay,
after the harvest and have that back on again.
okay. I will include that then the next time. Make sure that prescription is added in there.
Okay.
It gets,
Yeah, it's
you
gonna
get a
be a
little
lot
bit
better.
more bulky, it's gonna add another sheet of paper. Of course, if it's digital, it doesn't matter, but,
I look at them.
okay.
Alrighty. Can I get a motion?
I'll move.
Thank you, Tom. And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
And the last item on the agenda is the removal of a couple of names from a recreational cabin lease. The people that are on the lease are moving out of the area, and we've had a request to remove their names from the lease since they won't be in the area and be able to use it. So requesting to approve the removal of David and Christine Henschel from cabin lease number 30.
So in essence, that would just leave two names then on the lease?
William and
Pardon?
That would just leave two names on the lease? then?
Yes, yes.
And then I'm assuming that in the future, they could add a couple of names?
They could add, you can have as many names as you want. We've just got room for 4 on the lease agreement, so.
Okay. Alrighty. I'll make a motion to approve.
second.
Thank you, Dan. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carried.
And just as a note, I will be meeting with the coordinator for the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission and giving him a tour of our Deep Lake Park project this afternoon. The Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission has their meeting, I believe, the 27th, which I believe is next Tuesday. And they will be reviewing our second designation application at that time. So hopefully we will get that high rating and can get that classified as a regional park.
Well, good luck. Thank you.
Was this guy the one who voted against it?
Well, there was, yeah, I don't know.
Nice to get them out there.
Well, yeah, and I'm hoping, I was hoping to get more people out there, but at least we can get the coordinator out there. He's local, so it's,
Oh, okay.
he's out of Bemidji, so hopefully he can sway the vote of the rest of the E-team. Thank you.
Recorder. Good morning.
All right, I have a few items for you. I never have a lot, so you guys don't see me very often, but I have 2 things on the agenda this morning. The first thing is for the review and approval of the MSIS contract for a new 5-year contract, so it would start in 2023, go to 2027. MSIS is the vendor that we utilize for our recording software. So they actually, their organization serves 11 counties in Minnesota, county recorders' offices, and they work with us to find software vendors, to negotiate the contracts, and then they actually provide level 1 support when we have customer service type issues. So any counties that work with MSIS are actively then involved in the negotiation process, so we were able to be involved in negotiating with Tyler Technologies on our DocuPro contract this year. So I kind of outlined the increases that we were to see. We felt like, we landed on a pretty reasonable rate. It looks like we are gonna see a 5-cent increase per document. And then we also are gonna see some increases on the IDOC market, our revenue sharing with them. So there's some slight increases there. I did break down year by year what kind of the cost breakdown would be. But for 2022 and 2023, I would say those numbers are probably pretty high because it's based on our document counts, and our document counts are lower than we've seen in the last couple of years. So I would project that our numbers would be more similar to what they were in 2019. So I did have both the county attorney and IT review this contract, and all was good. So what I would be looking for today is your approval on this 5-year contract.
So I remember a discussion in prior years about the prices set and never increasing, so I see you're gonna investigate that and.
For IDOC market, yes. And that is something we have never looked into, changing the prices. And I've started researching, I'd like to see what our neighboring counties are at, and we are lower than every neighboring county. Obviously, we don't wanna go too high, but we wanna be reasonable, but I think be in line with what the neighboring ones are. So yes, that is something I'm working with. I know Becker County also has a new county recorder, so she's kind of working with me and see if we can get that aligned.
Okay, I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Shar.
Second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carried.
Thank you. The next item we have is to review the quotes from Tyler Technologies and ISC for our recording data backup solution. So I tried to break it down on this for you guys, because we have a few things going on to back up all of our data that we have. So the first item would be the Nexon Assurion, and that's the one that we work with ISC currently on. So those are actually servers that are located both in our IT department and Public Works. They're right here on site, and they back up on a continuous basis. So those actually were at the end of life in December of 2021. So they're still maintaining them as of now, but we do need to move forward with some kind of update at this point. So they are proposing just bringing on new servers to keep us up to date as possible. And the annual maintenance fees and working with ISC would all be the same, so it would just be the initial cost of upgrading those servers. The cost is $44,445, and that would come out of that Recorder's Equipment Fund that we have. I think the current balance is healthy enough to cover it at $538,000 approximately. So that's the one upgrade. And when those came due for updating, I decided just to look into what else we were doing for backups for the recorder's office. And I came across this Fiddler program that we were paying for. And that one came on several years ago, and we've kind of been using it as a backup service, but originally got brought on to respond to public requests for like bulk data, like from Zillow or different vendors and stuff. That never really came to fruition. They're not requesting that information from us. So we weren't really utilizing the service, but we were kind of utilizing it as a backup. Well, in conversations with Fiddler, they said that's probably not a great option. Because we don't use Fiddler services, they would have to convert all the data back to DocuPro data, and it would be rather expensive to get us back up and running. So we've since canceled that service. And in doing that, I was looking at moving to Tyler, who's with DocuPro, and they have a disaster recovery plan, which I kind of outlined. And so Tyler's disaster recovery plan, they update your data on a daily basis. We'd have, instead of on a continuous like our on-site service do, we'd have at least daily updates. And then it's a cloud-based solution. So the hardware for those cloud-based solutions are in Texas and Maine, so they're off campus, of course. And the pro, in my opinion, to this is that if we were to have some kind of major disaster, we would be up and running rather quickly. So as long as we have access to the internet, we'd be able to access all of our DocuPro recording software. So we kind of felt like this was a good backup in addition to what we had. And then the final one is something that is done through IT, and that's the VM, which is also, it sounds like a cloud-based thing that Rob deals with. And so that one wouldn't be changing, that would be the same. So I'm kind of proposing that we upgrade the Nexon Assurance to the newest version, and then remove the Fiddler and go to the Tyler Disaster Recovery Service.
One quick one.
Yeah.
I assume Rob reviewed all this.
Yes, sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yes, he did.
All right. A motion?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Tom. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carried.
Thank you.
The attorney is next.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm here in front of you to ask for approval of the MCAPS contract. It's a 3-year contract through STI at this point, which we've gone, we transitioned to STI, I believe, about 4 years ago. But ultimately, MCAPS, just to inform the board of the, if you don't know, MCAPS is the attorney case software that we use, and it is an attorney, county attorney specific user group throughout the state that has created MCAPS and continues to update that program. Right now, we are at approximately, I think last year, we paid for that program a little under, about $11,500, a little under $11,500 altogether. And that both encompasses the MCAPS program as well as the MCCC dues that relate to MCCC carrying the user group throughout. So right now, we're looking at, with MCAPS, an update that should be substantial coming out within a year. It is MCAPS 2020, and it's obviously not 2020, so we're very, very excited about the fact that it's about to happen. I was on the user group board. I drove down to St. Paul many, many times over the years, over the last couple of years to put my input on what that program should look like. I'm excited for it to come out. Ultimately, I do believe that the cost for the next 3 years should remain at that $11,500 to $14,000 annually. I'm guessing the board is going to ask me whether or not I've looked at other options. I have, and those other options are upfront costs prohibitive in the $90,000 range to set everything up, and then ultimately it would be about the same cost. We've been with MCAPS as the Hubbard County Attorney since approximately 2002, 2003. And at this point, I do believe it is the correct course of action to continue with MCAPS and sign this 3-year agreement. So my recommendation is to approve the agreement. Any questions?
Does it satisfy your needs? Sounds like it does.
It does. It's not a perfect program. It's software. As the board's aware, software is something that we increasingly utilize for every department, and it's incredibly important to have good software. It's not a perfect program, but looking at the options, it gets done what we need. Exactly.
That renewal form, those rates that are on that sheet, that's for the entire system?
It is. So you're looking at huge numbers,
Yeah, I
of
saw
course.
those
Yeah, and
huge
it's a
numbers.
little spooky. Ultimately, I can tell you annually, we are between, and it's gone up over the last, since 2002. It's gone up, a few $1,000s every 3 or 4 years, but it's been consistent with our user group in the last few years at that 10,000 to 11,500 number. And I don't expect that number to go up unless there are members of MCAP's other counties that leave. That could create a problem. But I don't expect with the new program coming out for that to be a problem. So
And what's your, of those total hours for the whole system, what's your total hours?
as far as county attorney count,
Yeah.
well, we have 4 attorneys. So our attorney count puts us at 4.
Oh, those are attorney counts, okay.
Yeah, and ultimately, a lot of the counties that are part of this user group, obviously Hennepin, Ramsey, Washington County have their own programs, because they create their own programs. But ultimately, there's a number of counties throughout the state that have in the 200 or 150 range of attorneys, and so they get billed per attorney. Which is something I could talk about as far as what the other options are and how they bill a little bit differently. Here with MCAPS, we are billed per attorney, so not per support staff member as well. So obviously I have an office of 8 individuals, including myself. We are only billed per attorney at this point for MCAPS. And that keeps us at that 11.5 number. So if there was an additional attorney, it would jump up to about an additional $3,000 is per attorney is about where it's at.
That was gonna be my question. If we had less attorneys, it'd be cheaper, and more attorneys, it'd be more expensive.
Yes, that is the answer to that question.
Alrighty. Thank you, Shar.
I'll second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Anything else I can do for you today? I think that was the only thing I had on the agenda. All right.
Thank you. Now we're on to the administrator. We
are at that point in time in the year where we have to make a determination of what our preliminary levy is gonna be and establish the date for the Truth in Taxation meeting for 2022. Having gone through the process to this date, we have made a preliminary assumption that we're gonna try to capture a 10% levy increase for Enbridge new tax capacity for future projects and future use. So that is the biggest chunk in this proposal. I'm gonna pull this up. So the biggest chunk in here is this item identified for capital reserves. We've also identified that here in use of fund balance under general and public safety, we haven't actually dealt with whether or not we're gonna do the capital projects that are requested for radios, for the Deep Lake Park project, but those numbers are reflected here. They're not actually use of fund balance, they're use of this capital reserves that we would be capturing here. So if we don't capture those capital reserves, then we really have to identify that those projects are not on the 2023 slate. We will be working through the course of October after the preliminary levy to determine whether or not we want those to be on the list. You will have a draft capital plan to review before we start whittling down to the final budget and levy. The expenditures here under general, I added a number to include what I think we're gonna have to add to our labor estimates for negotiations for 2023. That's why these numbers have changed a little bit. We are still looking at a sizable increase in public safety in the levy of $1 million to support their additional. We're gonna have additional conversation in October about the public safety budget. I made some changes in social services. We're showing that expenditures, this hasn't changed, but expenditures are only expected to go up by 2.5% in '23. We're estimating revenues to go up by 16% in '23. The increased levy is really a result of holding the levy flat for the last number of years. And showing us much smaller use of fund balance than we have estimated for the last several years. Now, we've overestimated on the social services budget for the last several years, so the $1.8 million of budgeted fund balance in '22 is not gonna come to pass. But by reducing our expenditure assumptions and increasing our revenue assumptions, we're getting more down to a real number of what we need to use for fund balance to balance this. I made a correction. I made an administrative increase in the amount of fund balance we're gonna use to reduce the levy this year and basically split that necessary increase for social services over 2 to 3 years is kind of the proposal of looking at that. But you can see if we tally those numbers up, that's an 11% increase for operations for this year. And that does not include these capital numbers, because those capital numbers are coming out of this other source of revenue. So we're at about 11% for operations and 9.6% increase for capturing that Enbridge tax capacity.
Do you want to explain to the public that's listening why we need to capture the Enbridge this year?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question, because that would be the next item. So the other item that you have in front of you is a draft press release identifying, essentially it's a press release presuming what the board's action would be today and have the ability to respond. So when we're setting a preliminary levy increase of 20%, we want to make sure that we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And the first instance here is we're not setting a 20% increase. We're capturing 10% of new capacity from the Enbridge investment in Hubbard County with Line 3 over the last several years. And that new tax capacity in the county will more than pay for that $1.6 million to set aside for future use. As I'm estimating, their tax capacity is about $5.5 million. Their tax bill will be more for the county, more than $1.6 million with this change. So they will carry that. It took a lot of finagling and reconfiguring to get these numbers to come out. So when I talk about tax impacts, I'm going to talk about that specifically. So the primary piece is setting aside, and new tax capacity has to be captured in the year that it's earned. If we capture it next year, it would just be a tax increase across all of the taxpayers. So every year, we typically would have about $50 million worth of new construction renovation in the county, and that would be about a 1.5% increase in our tax capacity. So we can capture that 1.5% increase without affecting other people's taxes. In this case, this tax capacity increase is 12%. So we can capture 10% without affecting other people's taxes. The balance of the operating, I think, is relatively clear without addressing staffing or public service levels. And we still haven't made the final determinations. The public safety piece includes still the consideration of the new day sergeant in replace of the 3 part-time deputies. We're showing those calculations in the background, but we haven't made those changes in IFS. Kay and I will work in the budgeting software after the board's decision today to draft a new IFS budget. You'll get a new copy of that 107-page document that shows the changes and where they line up, and then a new summary respective of this. And our goal then is to carry changes forward from now until December, and then only make one more modification to the budget after the board finally approves before the end of the year.
Can you summarize, Jeff, for the public, then what's driving the operating budget increases?
Yeah, the biggest chunk of the operating increase in public safety is the change in, I wrote it right here, so I'll just read it. Is a change in this, in the public safety. The DUI enforcement in the county has changed significantly. And that's good because it's improving safety on the roads, but it's also increased the average daily population in the jail. So 2 things are happening there. One, back in March, because that jail population went up, the board approved 5 additional jailers to operate the jail. With more people in jail, we need to have 4 new jailers. So currently, the operating procedure is we need 5 jailers and a supervisor on all the time to staff the jail with the population that we're operating in. So that's the biggest change. That was about just shy of $300,000 added to the operating budget. When we're filling the jail with our prisoners, we don't have the ability to board prisoners for other people. So we were budgeted for $345,000 worth of revenue for boarding of other prisoners this year, and we're only at about $80,000. So in '23, we have to adjust that revenue projection down significantly. So those 2 items account for $700,000 of the $1 million new ask, just the change in the operation, the change in the number of people in the jails. The balance of that really is eaten up by anticipated wage expenses and cost of living expenses for the next year for the 70-some employees in the jail. That staff increase appears throughout the rest of them, but if you want to explain the $1 million in public safety, it's $400,000 in new staff, it's $300,000 in lost revenue, and it's another $300,000 in increased wages for 2023. And as mentioned, most of the items that I just talked about are coming off of this press release, and the headline says, Hubbard County Board of Commissioners moves to capture new tax capacity from Enbridge investment. I've had Christine Davis from Enbridge review this document. I've worked with Kay and reviewed this document, had a couple other people take a look at this. the most important pieces out of why is it so high? It has to be high because the only opportunity to capture that tax capacity is through increasing the levy. But the important piece is at the bottom. With the overall countywide increase in tax capacity, we're anticipating the county tax rate is actually gonna go from 39 to 33%. And that 6% drop in tax rate, and it's very confusing. So what happens is, a home is usually taxed at 1%. A home valued up to $500,000 is taxed at 1%. So a $250,000 home would have a tax bill of $2,500. Our county tax rate of 40% means, 39.2% means they would pay 40% of that $2,500 here. The reduction of 6% means that they would pay 33% of that $2,500. So the net change is $62 per $100,000 worth of value as a decrease in the county tax. Now this year with the change in values, it's a little more complicated than that. And that's why I have these tax impact examples. And I've got 3 different examples here. So we've got a very typical, on the top, the Lakeshore. If I do this. This is a home that was valued at $429 in '21, $453 in '22, and $602 in '23 proposed value. So that's a 32.9% increase in value from '22 to '23. This property is valued above the homestead exclusion value, so there is no line there. This property also has an element that's over $500,000, so the first $500 is taxed at 1%. Anything over $500 is taxed at 1.25, so the net tax capacity for this property is $62.80. In 2022, the tax bill on this property at 39% for the county portion was $17.77. With the new 33% rate, that number goes to $20.72, which is a 16% increase. So it's half of the increase of the value, and a dollar increase of $2.95. The next example is, and this gets to affordability related to the county tax rate. I think it's really important to understand when we're talking affordability, we're talking about homes $250,000 or less. This property was valued at $178,000 in '21, $200 at '22, and $255 in '23. So you can see that they also had a large increase, 27% in value. Still qualifies for a decreasing amount of homestead exclusion. So the taxable market value is $240,928. The net tax capacity is 1%, so $2,410. And the tax bill goes from $713 to $795, which is an 11% increase, $82 on the year. And one more example. A home in '21 was valued at $88,000, '22 $99,000, and '23 $115,000. So the lower valued home saw a more modest increase in valuation of 16.5%. And that tax bill goes from $277 to $292, which is a 5.5% increase, an increase of $52 on the year. Again, we're only talking about the county portion. But you can see and hear the shift from the lower valued homes to the higher valued homes on the county portion of the tax. Approximately 70 to 75% of our net tax capacity comes from homes. The majority of that is in seasonal recreational, right? Those are the higher valued homes in the county. And then here's just an illustration that shows a straight $100,000 with no change. The dollar value goes from $392 to $330 per $100,000 worth of value. Last year, when we were planning for this anticipated tax capture, it was really clean. And then we had a 30% increase in our home values across the board, and now it gets muddied. So we have to identify that there is a shift. That shift would happen if we had a 0% levy increase, because those values increase significantly more than the lower values. And the tax increases would be more modest, but the shift from lower value to higher value homes would be just as pronounced. So that's the primary situation, is it got complicated. But the 6% reduction in county tax rate by the anticipated net tax capacity of Enbridge, and that's a conservative number. I actually came up with 30% instead of 33%, but I wanted to go with Kay's number of 33 as a new tax rate, because if it moves, it'll move in a positive direction for the taxpayers. So the question that I'll be asking for is a motion to approve a preliminary levy of a dollar amount, and I'm recommending $19,260,000, and to have a discussion and set the date for the Truth in Taxation meeting. And I've got 3 dates to propose. Remember that we have the AMC meeting is December 5, 6, and 7, so we would normally have this on the 6th, on the Tuesday the 6th, but we won't all be here. So I'm proposing either Tuesday, November 29th, Thursday, December 8th, or Tuesday, December 14th. The preliminary tax notices are due out between November 14th and 24th.
Excuse me, I would like it the 8th of December because I'm gone the following week.
So that Thursday. And given the schedule in December, we don't have to do this now, I'll put it on an October agenda, but that means we would change our schedule for December, and instead of having a board meeting on the 1st and 3rd and a work session on the 2nd, that we would have a board meeting on the 2nd and 3rd and no meeting on the first Tuesday in December. And again, that meeting I think has to be scheduled at or after 6 o'clock, so we've typically held it at 6 p.m.
So I have a board meeting on Friday?
No, we would have a board meeting
We
on the 13th.
we would have,
or
we
the
would
20th.
not have a meeting on December 1st, on the first Tuesday, or on December 6th, the first Tuesday. We would, and instead of the work session on the 13th, we would have a regular meeting, and then on the 20th, we would have a regular meeting.
But do the TNT on the 8th.
Do the TNT on Thursday, December 8th.
I would point out that that would be a month since your last meeting. Was your meeting in November, is the first on the 15th. And then nothing on the 13th.
Yeah, when a meeting falls on the 1st, it's, so we don't have to determine the schedule. What we do have to do today is set a preliminary levy and a date for the Truth in Taxation meeting.
I'm good with December 8th.
Yeah, does the 8th work for everybody? December 8th for Truth and Taxation?
Okay with the 8th.
Okay, so that was the easy part.
That's the easy part, absolutely. Now I anticipate questions and discussion.
So you said 19,260,000, what's the percent on that?
That's a 20% increase from our current $16,050,000.
So you're asking for a 20% increase in the levy.
10% of which will be set aside for future capital needs in '23 and future, and every year after that, and 10% for operating.
Well, I had more in mind, something like 19% to kind of force a little bit of cutting in the next 2 months.
And that is completely your discretion.
Okay. I just needed to say it.
Well, of course, if we set it at 20, we can still cut.
Well, yeah, but if you said at 19, you force the issue then.
That's true.
Except if you find that you can't, and I'm not opposed to setting it to 19, but, you know, like, for instance, the jail has numbers that we have to pay for as far as expenses for this year. So if we set it too low, then we end up using more fund balance.
Yeah, the problem with government though, it's just so easy to set your tax rate. Oh, we need the money, okay, we'll just set the tax rate higher. Well, you know, you kind of overdo that a bit.
I think everybody's in agreement to capture the 1.6.
Yes.
Yes,
definitely.
from Enbridge.
So that's off to the side, so that's 10%.
Yep.
Yeah, then now you're just concentrating on the operating stuff. I agree. I mean, I hope to get lower than 20%. Certainly, over the next month, we can whittle away at some things, and, you know, I'd like to see it land somewhere between 16 and no worse than 18. Whether we can get there or not, I don't know. I mean, I've poured through some of this stuff, and it's not gonna be easy.
And we have the question yet of labor costs.
Yeah, I would show you that this number that I plugged in relative to labor costs, and we don't know where we're gonna come out relative to negotiations for '23. I'm showing a budget need of 19.5 million and a proposed budget of 19.26, which means we're already telling you we're gonna roll our sleeves up and find 240,000 more than the changes we found originally since this first came out in August. 19% doesn't concern me. As Commissioner Christensen mentioned, that could bring into play the use of additional fund balance. And you're well aware that we have sufficient fund balance to use that as a policy decision this year. So those numbers don't concern me. I'm asking for 20% because I think that that's what we can make work, and I know that we can duck under that before December.
And the projections, Jeff, though, we potentially don't even have all the labor that might occur from negotiations potentially covered in this, do we?
This number that shows $239,000 to goal includes an additional estimate that we did not have the last time you looked at. The last time I showed this as being even, budgeted even, and now I put it back in there and I'm showing that we have work to goal relative to that amount.
All right, that makes me feel a little better.
So a percent on our, on our labor budget. I was having a great conversation with Kevin from St. Louis County. 1 percentage point on their budget is $1.7 million. 1% on our budget is $170,000. It's a completely different scale. So 1% on our labor budget is $170,000.
Because that's the only piece, if you set it too low, the preliminary too low, that I worry about. You know, hopefully by the time we have to set the actual number, all of that's ironed out. But if you proposed it a little higher than it was last time, then I'm comfortable at 19.
I'm showing at what I think is a reasonable increase.
So then for the public, would you explain about the Heritage Campus and the debt service and all that? And I know currently we're not using levy dollars, but it still does play into the budget.
Yeah, and so this year, for the first time, we are showing the Heritage Campus and their net of operations in our preliminary budget. And you can see there is no line behind Heritage for levy. The proposed budget, and I haven't seen the final one yet, but the proposed budget is for expenditures of 7 million, revenues of 7.9, debt service of 728, for a positive operating balance of $71,000 at the end of the year from operations. So It's important for this board to know that Hubbard County is not a $45 million operation, it's a $63 million operation.
And that $71,000 does not include depreciation.
Does not include depreciation, this is just cash, operating cash. None of what you're seeing in an operating budget includes those liabilities.
And it's important to note that also, Heritage, you would have, the public would have saw a significant impact on budgets if it wasn't for American Rescue Plan money.
Correct.
Because basically, all the American Rescue Plan money has gone into shoring up Heritage to date. So this budget proposal for next year is based on it meeting these projections.
Cash flowing.
Yep.
Yes. The last report we got from Heritage showed it at a negative cash flow for this year of $100,000 a month, and that's after we put in the ARPA funds.
Yep.
So this budget for next year is a proposed change relative to cash flow and operating and occupancy.
So if it does not meet these expectations next year, it will cost potentially local levy dollars.
And we do have a healthy fund balances.
We do have healthy fund balances for all fund accounts.
I'd like to keep them healthy.
And yeah, it depends. Our current fund balance policy, and I'd like to bring this forward and consider modifying it, is 35 to 42%. And that's a bare minimum. 42% is 5/12. That means we have 5/12 of our operating budget on hand on January 1st to get us through the first 5 months of the year before we collect our first half taxes, right? So 42% really should be the minimum. And because we are in a good financial condition, I would propose a 50 to 75% fund balance for all of our operating funds. Now, that's not designated funds or specific funds or special funds, but it's, social services would maintain at least 50% of 9 million, right? And right now they have that. Last report, we saw $4.7 million. They're proposing $9 million so that they're in that target. Highway, kind of a moving target, but we know they have designated funds too, and then they have operating funds and fund balance. And general fund is in good shape as well. But as far as I'm aware, right about the 50% mark. So we don't have a lot to give. And I think that being in good financial condition means moving to a healthier fund balance policy. And Kay and I will bring that forward probably in October or November.
Well, I know a couple of years ago.
But a couple $100,000 here or there to even this out and to get under a mark makes sense. It's possible.
I know a couple of years ago with the pandemic started and everything, we had asked the department heads to trim their budgets, and they came through.
Yes.
So I know that things are possible, even if everything goes crazy after we set all these. So it's a good feeling to.
Yep.
To have that.
As Commissioner Delahunt mentioned, the Heritage does not include depreciation. None of this includes depreciation. That's what setting aside 1.6 million now for future use includes. So with Heritage, we have $50 million worth of plant operations. Depreciation on $50 million every year is a big number. Actually, but 3%, it's about 1.6 million. So it's a good start. And that's having a capital balance is, if you owned your own business and you had a $500,000 building, you'd set 5% a year aside, so you'd spend put $250,000 in for future repairs. That's what this capital reserve does, is it puts money aside against that depreciation amount. And it's something that most counties don't have the opportunity to do, and right now we're presented with the opportunity because of the investment by Enbridge to be able to do that. Meat and potatoes, what that means is if we have to do a $5 or $10 million project at some point, a renovation or construction, we won't have to add that to the levy. We can bond for that. We can pay part of it so that we bond for less. And then we would use those funds to pay the debt service on that and not have to add that to the levy. And $1.6 million is a good number towards those future payments.
We are really, you know, I mean, it's been years in the making from former board members planning well, and then to capture the Enbridge. We are really blessed to be sitting where we are, because there's a lot of counties that are not.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't think we've ever had an opportunity like this in the county to do that. And it really does, it really has the potential to set the county up long-term to be in
Yes.
a really good position with a good, healthy, capital improvement account. You know, once you get to a certain balance in there that you're happy, you're content with, what you do with that revenue after that, who knows?
So it's not unprecedented, but it's never happened here. Roseau County had a significant investment from Minnesota Power a number of years ago. And they raised their tax levy by 15% the first year and 10% the second year. And nobody said boo about it because it didn't affect their taxes.
Right.
Minnesota Power paid the additional assessment. The only change is that didn't happen in a year when their residential property values went up in excess of 25%. So I do know there is a shift there that we will see. We saw one example of it, but it is the only time we could capture that.
So in the use of fund balance for social services, $875,000, where's that leave the fund balance for social services after that?
I'm assuming that's still gonna leave us somewhere around the 42%. It'll drop us under 50. If we were at 4 million out of 9 million, that'd bring us to 43%. That's if we used it all. And I still think there's some rounding in here, so if we budget 875, I don't anticipate we'll spend that. But if we did, we would still be at better than 42%.
And I wouldn't be surprised this next year too with, you know, not only the hiring environment, but the supply environment, that if a lot of things that are budgeted for don't get spent.
I think that's probably true.
I don't know what that number would be, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some wiggle room there too. That would occur.
We are still budgeting at 100% of our proposed labor, and we always have vacancies, right? So we usually see some underspending on that. But if you look in the major departments this year, we're really not that far under. And especially in jail and the sheriff's office, whatever we've been under on actual wages month to date, so we're through August, we're at 67% of the year. We're at 66 or 67% of wages spent. We're up on overtime, because to cover the shifts, we've been having to ask people to work additional hours, right? So whatever we've saved in having vacancies, we've paid for in having those people covering those vacancies. So we really are not at the point where, I read in the paper the other day that Cass Lake was budgeting at 95% for social services and law enforcement. If we saw a strong enough trend over a period of time, we could do that. But I just don't see it right now over the last couple of years as those things have settled out. But that is how we end up seeing some monies not spent, whether it's projects or equipment or staff. Sometimes we come in a little under. My goal would be to budget to 99% of expenditures and 101% of revenue, and that 2% would what we would intentionally throw into the fund balance as the cost of living goes up. It'll take a couple years to get there. In the general fund, we're really close.
So now, I guess we need a motion to set the preliminary levy.
Prior to doing that, because I really want the public to understand why we're making decisions. Jeff, you're gonna be submitting this to the local papers?
Yeah, what you have in front of you is a draft press release to identify these changes and explain why it's a significant change, and also to explain what to expect relative to tax changes.
Because if the headline is, levies X amount of dollars, a lot of people, or percent, a lot of people don't read beyond the headline, and it's important they understand.
In other words, you're saying you'd like accurate information right out of the gate. I thought that's what I heard you say.
So that would be my proposal, is we submit this to the local media, we put it on the county website, and you could include it in the motion, or you could do a second motion after. But the first one should be to establish the preliminary levy and to set the date for truth and taxation. The second half, I think we're agreed on.
I think the public will really understand the rationale for capturing the Enbridge fund. I don't think
Yes,
that's a problem.
I agree.
Regarding the operating percentage, 10%, I think it's pretty clear too that the competitive hiring environment, how tough it is to find quality workers, everybody's experiencing that, just not county government. That's throughout every community across the whole nation, struggling to find workers. So if you want good workers, that's driving wages up. That's impacting us. And then the public safety issue with the jail being full. Your jail's full. You don't have a lot of choice, you have to staff the jail. I don't know how you prevent that. And then the small increase of social services is not on a line with a typical year. So those are the things that are driving the budget. I mean, what's your option?
And we
Fill
also,
your jail up? Well, now you're gonna be like Minneapolis or other places like that just let people run around and cause havoc? I don't think we want that in Hubbard County.
and when we did a 0% during COVID to provide relief for the taxpayer and the business owner, we knew then that at some point down the road,
It's gonna have to be made up.
yeah.
And I think you throw in the inflation that we were seeing.
Yeah,
That's a-
just even gas alone, when you look at the department
Yeah,
budgets.
And
Yeah.
I was gonna say how that affects all the budgets.
Yeah.
And if you believe the government at 8.3%, I believe inflation is a lot higher than that, but,
Energy cost is over 40.
yeah, it's, I hope the public understands.
Of course, I know every county's situation is different, and I'm definitely for capturing the full 10% of the Enbridge. But at the AMC meeting, some of the figures that I've heard from other counties are ranging in the like 4, 7, 8% range. And that's why I still think that we need to go a little bit lower than what is proposed by Jeff, just to force some cutting.
Well, we have that power afterwards.
Well, it doesn't really force it, go to each department head, okay, here's your set amount, you gotta come under it.
And I totally understand
In
that.
fact, you were mentioning that
I think I
last week?
mentioned that last meeting. You were at 19, I think some of us
19.
maybe were at 18. So, yep.
So that's all I can say.
Is that a motion, Tom?
Okay, I'll make a motion for 19%,
And to set the truth and taxation December 8th at 6 PM.
December 8th, yes.
I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion?
You don't want me to drop it a percent.
19%. Okay, we have a motion and a second to set the preliminary budget at 19% and the truth and taxation meeting on December 8th. There's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Now we got a lot of work to do.
And then we need a motion on this. So I'll move to have Jeff submit the media release.
The amended press release?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that motion carried.
And the only update that I have is relative to our contract negotiations. Commissioner Christensen and Kruger and I have met with 4 of the 7 groups for a first meeting. We have the balance of our first meetings this week and next. And second meeting scheduled for the first 4 groups as well. And our goal is to hopefully get this done before the end of the year, because that's the trigger for us to be able to move forward with the proposed classification increase. And that classification increase would be our market adjustment relative to being able to attract and retain quality employees. So that proposed classification moves us from 100% of the labor market to 110% of the market, which is a pretty healthy shift at this point in time. And as mentioned, that the preliminary budget now includes numbers for that wage scale adjustment and an anticipated COLA in 2023. So I think we're in relatively good shape.
All right. You have anything else, Jeff?
I do not have anything other than questions I could answer. I will bring it up, but we don't need to do it. Thank you. So Gina reminded me, inaction is actually a perfect action in this point in time. Our appointment of our current veteran service officer, statute allows us to provide a notice that we do not intend to reappoint Jerry for the next 4 years, starting in January, and we would have to do that by the end of this month. So I bring to you today that I'm assuming that as long as he's willing to do the job, we want to reappoint him for that position. So by inaction, we are taking the appropriate action. But what I would intend to do then is during the organizational meeting in January, we would just have a resolution reappointing him for the 4 years. We don't have a choice to not do that in January unless today we said we're not going to reappoint you in January. So by bringing that up, we are identifying a statutory responsibility. I have the highest regard and confidence in Jerry in that position, and I believe everybody else does as well. So I will confer that to him today and tell him that we will put that resolution on the organizational meeting in January.
Sounds good.
Statute's a little goofy. Sometimes you have to affirmatively take action. Sometimes you have to take action to not have it happen automatically. And this is one of those cases.
Thank you. Well, then we'll be on to committee reports. Okay, now, don't all jump at it. Who wants to go first? David? Thank you.
Make sure to send that out right away today as soon as you.
Yep. As a matter of fact, if you don't mind,
70,000 less.
I'm gonna go do that.
All
Once I
right.
get the reports.
Start with AMC. Tom and I were down at AMC, so I've got a few things from my policy committee. I was on the Public Safety Policy Committee, and one thing that was brought up, kind of probably was brought up in Tom's area too, is we need to work on establishing minimum standards for cybersecurity. MCIT has coverage for 2023, but they will be expecting minimum standards and a cyber policy in the future in order to have that insurance enforced. So we'll want to have Rob and Jeff and whoever else needs to be involved in that, start working on a policy or updating our existing policy. And then in the Public Safety Committee, one thing that was discovered is Minnesota is dead last among all states in corrections and supervision funding. Glorious position, right?
Excuse me?
Minnesota is dead last amongst all states in correction and supervisory funding. With increased crime, we should not be dead last in funding. And it's not just increased crime in the Twin Cities. It's statewide now. We're experiencing it here as many other rural counties are.
And if I could interject there, Dave, it just came out that Minnesota now is one of the higher crime states because we've surpassed the 50% average of all the states in the United States.
So one of the common themes, of course, probably across most policy committees at AMC, but specifically in the public safety policy, as long as I've been doing this now for the last 3 years, and I'm sure it goes back even further than that, is supervision funding has been woefully inadequate from the state. Especially in certain models, there's 3 different supervision models in the state. We use the Department of Correction models. There's a county-based model. The county-based model, I think, is the one that really gets the shaft. They really struggle with the amount of funding they get. And it really needs to be, the funding needs to be equalized across all 3 models. And the state really needs to do a better job of funding it, period. And that includes mental health and the need for mental health in juvenile facilities. I mean, you probably are hearing that in your policy committees too. It's a common theme, it's a common thread. Everybody's identifying the problem. Nobody knows what to do. Or they have some ideas, but you can't even get off the ground without funding. Most secure and unsecured mental health beds are full. And I think that's true for juvenile centers too. We would like to, the policy committee would like to see equitable funding for all supervision models. Studies show 60% of new prison intakes can be attributable to failures on the supervisory and correction side. That was a study cited. He didn't cite exactly where from, but it was cited down there, and I asked twice to make sure I had it right. And also 60% of all crime is committed by people in the system, that are already in the system. So correction and supervision is critical to lowering that number. The Community Supervision Work Group created a separate work group inside the policy committee. They're looking at how are they going to get this message to the state that by not funding this properly, you're actually paying for it later. You're paying it in your corrections at some point down the line. Your society's paying this. But how to get that message to the legislators and get something actually done. So they created this work group, and what they settled on is there's probably going to be a resolution coming forward to support an equalized funding model and an increase in funding for supervisory services. That'll come to all 87 counties. So the policy group is going to be looking for every county to support that resolution. I think that would be a good time to have Mr. Smith, Mark, come from our corrections and kind of give us a summary of where it's all been at, and then we can make a decision when that comes out, whether we support it or not. So that's something you might want to make sure, Jeff, you get that on the calendar when that resolution shows up, and see if we can get Mark on a work session. And another thing that came up when I was talking to a cohort from Wadena County is he said you might want to consider a social worker who works closely with probation for jailed residents to help with incarceration issues and reentry into the community.
Which is
When
what
the time is up.
Beltrami just hired.
Yeah, did they do that too? So I don't know how that works because there's be some crossover to what probation does, you know, so you would really have to include probation in this discussion if you wanted to go that route and see what that would look like.
So I talked to one of the commissioners from Beltrami. They've had this in place for 6 months. They're already seeing positive changes.
Yeah.
So that would include things like, do they have a place to live when they get out? Do they have a
Right.
job? What kind of support system do they have?
Yeah, because if they don't have anything, if they've been in jail an extended period of time, they go back out and they run into brick wall after brick wall after brick wall, they're just gonna end up right back in jail. Nothing gets solved. So there may be some merit behind it, but it would take some vetting with probation, law enforcement, and social services involved in that discussion to see if you could tailor something that would make sense and be beneficial. And I talked to, I think it was a former sheriff from Clay County, and he was telling me about a new facility they have in North Dakota, the West Central Juvenile Facility, that's more than just what we have here. It's actually a school too, and it actually does trauma services too, and they're having quite a bit of success, and a lot of counties are asking for beds there, but they're full.
Is that the nonprofit where the CEO was he was in jail and then has moved forward?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So
I think
my
there's
goal is,
3
I got,
sites in North
yeah,
Dakota, Bismarck, Grand Forks, and West Fargo.
I got his card, and I'm gonna try and, maybe work with Senator Ucky and have him maybe, if we can get over there and tour the facility, with him being on, if he gets elected on the HHS chair on the Senate side, it may be an example of what regional facilities could look like to help fill that bed shortage that we have. And then related to the Northwest Emergency Communication Board, the 403 statute is needing to be rewritten. ECN took the project on. The statute is really dated back prior to virtually internet and even the Armor system and IPAWS and Next Generation 911. None of the nomenclature lines up, or the terms line up with the old language, so it really needs a rewrite. But ECN took the project on, and they ended up basically taking the SECB radio board for the state, making them an advisory opinion only. So when they rewrote the language, they took some power away from an existing board that is a conglomeration of all the regional radio boards. So they urged us to reject that if it comes along with that particular language in there. So more to come on that. ECN was kind of a mess for a while, but they got a new director in, so it looks like it's turning the corner and getting better. And then, what else did I have? I had Heritage. Up next with Heritage, we had our executive board meeting, and we put together the budget, and we basically put together a worst-case budget based on our experience last year. We thought things were gonna come out of COVID pretty good, and there'd be a rise in census and stuff, so we budgeted like we typically would for a typical year based on where we were at the beginning. None of that materialized, as we all discovered, so now we're just gonna take worst-case scenario, with the census not growing really at all. I think it's flat
It's
in
flat.
the budget the whole year.
Not in the manor, but in
Yeah.
Heritage Living Center.
And that committee worked on the points that are needed for a work-back plan that we can present to the county board. So we'll finalize it at the Heritage Campus Board meeting this month, and then we will come forward to the county board with a work-back plan and a request for whatever ARPA funds are needed to shore things up to date. And then this board can hopefully adopt the budget, and then we'll just have to really keep a close eye on it. But there are changes afloat, as most of you know. Kurt has resigned, retired, not resigned, retired his position on the Heritage Board after, what,
November 4th.
35 years? Has he been there?
I think so.
I think it was,
It's effective
Kurt said
November
that,
4th.
so a real long run there. So there will be a change in leadership there. We do have an opening on the Heritage Campus Board yet that needs to be filled. So, and that board will just work to actively stay engaged and really watching the numbers this year, and hopefully we can come out of this. But the big takeaways are, we have to solve the staffing problem, because we're using a nursing pool that's costing us 180 to 200 grand a month. 3 times what it would cost if we could find staff ourselves. Even if the budget stays like it is, if we solve even a portion of that staffing problem, it's gonna improve the bottom line drastically.
Did you ever look at the website, that coolworks.com? I think I shared it with you, Shar, I think a couple of weeks ago or whatever. Like Indeed, but it's much more sophisticated for
I did look at that.
coolworks.com.
Yeah.
Is that with a C or a K?
See. Should take a look
Yeah,
at
it's
that.
another tool that could be used to try
It's
and
all
attract,
over. Yep,
find staff.
sorry, I just had to throw that
Yeah.
in there.
And you'll see in the budget that comes forward that we're gonna put forward a larger marketing budget that could include marketing for finding staff. So the average, I read a statement at the last board meeting, the average percentage of budget spent on marketing for facilities similar to that across the nation. I looked and found 3 different sources, and they all kind of align pretty well. In 2022, the average percent of your budget spent on marketing was 4.86%. We were scheduled to spend, well, 4.86% of the budget would be roughly almost $250,000. We were spending 15 to 20 grand a year. We weren't even
Saving
giving,
money.
we weren't even
Saving
giving
money.
ourselves a chance to fill units. So those are some of the things that'll come forward in the work back plan. That's what I have. Thank you.
Dan?
Sure, I can piggyback off of Dave's there. You know, past practices, as we know historically, as we age each year, doesn't seem to work. I understand the idea of being a correction agent myself for the state. Dumping money in there is important, but it's the onset. It's prior to them. It's the prevention. It's the schools. It's Hubbard and prevention. It's the ordinances that we enact to keep our community safe. By that time they get to probation, you're dumping money out. You gotta get ahead of the game when they're younger. It's not when they're in the system. It's not when Corey brings them into the system and the.
Right, you just jogged the memory of a comment made down there by former law enforcement and a former superintendent. The one fella said that, I've been coming here for 10 years, and it's the same story over and over
Yeah,
again, and
it's the same
nothing
line.
changes, and he said, and he brought up exact point you did. As a matter of fact, I brought that up the year before, that you can identify these problems much earlier than you used to be able to. They're starting to show up in elementary age kids. And so you can see the trends. The debate is how do you get ahead of it? What kind of services and things do you spend, and where do you do it? You basically got 2 places. You either do it in social services or you do it in your school. Because you can't fix the home environment. You're not gonna change that without drastic public policy changes that, are gonna conflict with parental rights. And I don't think that's the way to go. So you got those 2 venues that you have to figure out, okay, how do we identify it early, and what do we do to help? There's ideas out there, but it all costs money.
But you're dumping it, I don't know, about the same amount of money, but you're dumping it into probation. It's like,
You're
no,
paying
you
eventually.
gotta go
Yep.
way ahead of the game. And
Yeah,
you can't
I'd rather spend the
seem,
money early.
you can't seem to get the policymakers or decision makers to understand that. So, school resource officer, Hubbard and prevention, the summit, the ACEs, all these things are important. And that's where we need to be looking, not on the other end. That's just my take on it, being in the system. But anyhow, Northwest Juvenile Training Center, you got the host agreement. And just a reminder to the board members, Northwest Juvenile Training Center is owned by Beltrami Cats, Clearwater, Hubbard, Kitson, Lake of the Woods, Pennington, and Roseau. Yeah, the purpose of this Northwest Juvenile Training Center is providing a home school and detention services. So we have this here. And we have, I think, in my opinion, and I'll let Ted interject his opinion, but I think we have a great director. which comes from the mental health side for from North Homes. And we've made tremendous strides. You know, our struggle, of course, is labor market and things of that nature, but we've made some real positive but big changes in the system and how Northwest has been run. And I think we're on task. We did have an increase. I think it's like 3-4%, 3.5% increase. Cheaper than most areas, and I mean cheaper isn't like in the cities, 12% increases for their per diems for non-members, and we are not at that.
Our rates were lower to begin with, and then
Yeah.
we had a lower increase.
You know, I'm trying to think, trying to find page 10 here. So, we have, for instance, member counties, residential treatment primary care center. You know, if you're a member county, Hubbard County is $245 a day, non-member $288. If you go into non-secure, primary care, members $247, non-members $290. So investing that money onset at the beginning, years ago, prior to obviously my becoming here, or coming here, the investment is paying off, obviously, with social services. I mean, law enforcement, whoever uses the facility, it's costing the taxpayers less money. But I think we have a really good director, good board, proactive. Our board members consist of, just so you know, Sheriff's Department and probation, state and county, and of course commissioners from each and every one of these counties I listed prior to. Let's see what else. There's a lot of information, but I'll send it to Jeff and you can look through it and read it. Otherwise, Hubbard Prevention, we're making the trek. We're moving. We're waiting for all the information from the schools and do a little information from the student body. We can formulate that on where our trends are as far as, chemical dependency, mental health, all these great things. And that piece of information that we get is what we use for Hubbard and Prevention, but that can be used in all sorts of things. The information can be disseminated to social services if you're looking at that aspect. I'm not really sure about that yet, Dave. That you presented, I gotta look into that. But anyhow, everything's going well. Thank you.
So I have a comment between what Dave and Dan was talking about, and I don't remember the percentage, but it's over 50% of the people that are incarcerated grow up in homes where the family structure, it's usually the father missing. And so we can dump as much money as we want, but we need to support the family structure outside of this board as much as we can, because that does affect
I agree.
how kids grow up.
Yeah, and that's where you see some of these juveniles, when they serve their sentence, the worst place for them to go is back home.
Yeah.
What's the alternative?
So MRC had a meeting which I ended up not attending, but Dan sent me just an overview, so I'm going to read. The 2023 draft priorities are transportation funding, county-based purchasing, rural broadband funding, emergency readiness grants, energy for Greater Minnesota manufacturing and residential needs, support for Greater Minnesota community hospitals, preserving tax base, DNR regulatory authority over the public drainage maintenance and repair, and then these were added at the meeting last week. Opposed drainage registry portal. If any of you know what that is, anybody from the United States could stop a project in the state of Minnesota by objecting to it, by putting going to a portal and then saying they object, down to the point if you wanted to trap a beaver. Support public land survey, support more funding for solid waste, and oppose the clean car rule. Currently proposal for the clean car rules by 2035, there would be no gas vehicles being allowed to be purchased or registered, new vehicles in the state of Minnesota. And then Dan announced that at the end of this year, he's retiring. So we'll be looking for a new director there. And then the only other committee report I have is the HRA met yesterday, and we went through a new lease policy, which is very lengthy, but spells out specifically what is expected from each renter. And so hoping to have a much better success rate. Carolyn will go through each page. She's gonna read word for word to everyone so they understand it. And then also, the rent is due between the 1st and the 5th. And if by the 21st, the rent is not received, then this is a change. Then Carolyn will send a letter to the renter saying that their rent has to be paid in full, plus the next rents by the, so let's say it was in August, so by the 5th of September, the August, whatever's behind in August, plus the September rent will have to be paid in full or eviction notices start. And it takes you have to allow 30 days for the notice, and so by doing that, hopefully it'll motivate people to keep up on their rent, and also it costs between $3,000 and $5,000 to actually evict a person. So we're trying to Carolyn's trying to be proactive too. She said most people just up and leave, including leaving their stuff behind. So one of the things we were also looking at is hiring just one person to manage all the properties for janitorial services, instead of there's several people that are just doing a little bit here or there.
But the positive side, are you saying that the tenants are doing the janitorial services?
No.
Or who's doing it now?
There's several people in Park Rapids that pick up, odd jobs. And so instead of having 4 or 5 people do it, they would hire one person to not manage, but take care of all the properties for like 15 hours a week. So for instance, if I moved out and I left all my stuff,
It costs so much cheaper.
but you still have to go in. Last month they had somebody leave. There was stuff almost up to the ceiling, the entire, and so the other thing that they're doing is they're gonna start inspecting every apartment at least once a year.
You're supposed to do that.
But they haven't had staff to do that. So, anyway, that's all I have.
Can't do it with one, Carolyn being the only person. there.
Right, right, so
Either
we're,
Mary's gotta get out there, somebody's gonna get out there and
Yeah.
assist her.
Tom?
Okay, well, yesterday evening I went to the Township Association meeting, and Chip gave a presentation on Deep Lake Park, and it seemed to be interest in it and well received. Also, Corey talked about statistics of crime, or whatever you want to call it, incidences in townships. I won't say anything about Schoolcraft, but okay. And then at the AMC, I'm on the environmental committee. One of the priorities that was voted on was it has to do with solid waste. Making sure all the tax that the state collects goes to the counties instead of some going to their general fund. Another item that was brought up there, and they're looking at how to approach it, and that has to do with these large solar farms, like 400 some acres or more. Should the county be involved in the conditional use permits of it, or just the MPCA? I think general consensus was leaning towards the MPCA handling all of it, but then I brought up that, okay, these solar panels do have an end-of-life cycle to them. If the county is gonna get stuck with having to receive the disposal of them, I think the county probably would wanna be involved in the beginning. So they're gonna look more into that some more.
that's a good point, because a lot of that isn't recyclable, so then there's gonna have to be a special demolition spot
Yeah,
for them.
yeah, and see, the county gets stuck with it,
Yep.
wouldn't they wanna be involved at the beginning?
Yep.
So, yeah, they're gonna look into that some more, so that didn't get on any priority list. Then they also had a SWCD meeting last week, and I brought up the LID, the
Oh,
Lakes Improvement District with them. And the consensus of the group was that, you know, the high water issues probably could be best addressed with the Crow Wing watershed. And Chris Pence of Bowser, he brought up that funding from the Clean Water Act would not be able to be used if it's specifically for reducing water levels. However, it can be funds maybe get from it if you can show that the high water level is causing water clarity issues or shoreline disturbance, because those areas the funds can be used. And Crystal believed that, you know, for those reasons you can get some money from that. Of course, there's other funds available too, but that's for the Clean Water Act. And then Crystal will keep me informed on the formation of the advisory committee, and they are very much in favor of having some people on from Beltane to be on that committee. So I think they're going to start forming it in November with meetings beginning in January. So they'll keep me up to date on that, and I'll make sure that Beltane's involved in that. But yeah, they do want to be part of it, using the Crow Wing watershed as trying to mitigate that problem. That's about it.
Oh, good, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just have one thing. I don't know if all the board members got, I got a email from Connie Carmichael. I see, Dave, you got it because you're on my email, but, so there's gonna be a dementia expert. Tipa Snow, they're, living at home, is holding a
I was gonna present that.
October 6th. Did you? Okay, so go for it.
Okay.
I'll quit talking.
Okay. Well, that's later on in my piece here. So I'll start off with,
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you hadn't shared. Duh. Go ahead.
save the best for last.
Yeah.
We'll start off with the Transportation Advisory Committee. It's the Headwaters Regional Development Commission, kind of facilitates those meetings. They're to promote the maintenance of an integrated transportation network in the Headwaters region, which supports the local movement of goods and people, and which provides adequate connections to district, state, and national transportation systems. We talked about the projects that are in the northwest region of the state that were currently happening on the state level, and the only one in Hubbard County would be Highway 71 North that comes out of Bemidji and goes down to Highway 9, County Road number 9. They were resurfacing that. I believe it was, I think they called it the slurry that they put on it, terms I haven't heard of before. But that was part of the topic, part of the conversation. We also talked about funding programs. Part of the targeted this year is $2,490,000 for that region in state funding for different projects. We also got a presentation on the MIN-SHIP program, which is the Minnesota State Highway Investment Plans. They went through that. They also had us do a survey at the time, which was all over the internet or our phones or handheld computers. And we were given choices on if you had dollars, would you spend it here and there and stuff like that. And it was pretty much in line. We were all pretty much in line with the same ideas. Do you want to try to promote, like we are, transportation for shipping goods and peoples and stuff like that? Do you want to spend more on bike trails and stuff like that? That was not as favorable as highways. Let's see, the next meeting I had was gonna kind of piggyback on what David and Dan were talking about with the juveniles. It was JDAI, Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. They were talking about data reports Hubbard County, they have, does a good job of collecting data. Plans for, they're working on a plan for 2023, the northern region. They have one judge as a stakeholder, a couple other stakeholders. They want to meet bi-monthly for about an hour. They would like to have some representation from Hubbard County too. So that's something, when it becomes more of a concrete plan, I'll probably come before the board and see. One of the pilot programs that they're talking about is a risk assessment tool with the group, and a group in Roseau County is working on it now. The main theme is they want to look at how do kids get into the system. So basically, that's the thing. If you can prevent them getting in there to begin with, maybe we can help that out. They've got 150, or they got 300 juveniles that they're assessing, I guess would be the proper term. One of them, it's just, like I say, it's a tool for across the region. They wanted to collect the data, have some representation from the counties, and then kind of see what could be the alternatives to detention. And I know that they also mentioned that Sanford and Bemidji is working on a behavioral program, a health program in Bemidji, and they're trying to set something up in Park Rapids and the Park Rapids schools. Next on my list is the Polk County incinerator. That's kind of of course, the 5 counties or whatever it is that we are in this group. We're talking about, it's like a 3-legged stool. You get part of our revenues from levy or assessments, steam sales to businesses in Boston, and then also on recycled goods that we sell. They talked about the tipping fee increase up to $80. I know Josh brought this up last week, I believe it was. One thing I wanted to highlight was the updated pricing on recyclables. So we'll take aluminum, I'm not gonna cover all of them, but I'll hit the high spots here. So in September of 2020, aluminum was at $880 a ton. It went all the way up to March of this year, or excuse me, June of this year. It went up to $2,500 a ton. Currently, it's at $1,500 a ton. So a $1,000 drop in just 3 months here. Let's see, another one here. Number 2, plastic. There again, back in September of 2020, it was $150. Went up to $1,210 in October of 2021. Currently, it's at $54. So from $1,210 down to $54. Another, some of those were, I guess, were the drastic ones. Everything else, though, has basically dropped. Most of them not that drastically, but all of them, they're not at historic lows. We were at historic highs, and now they've come back down or even lower than what some the historic lows would have been. And that's, I guess, you can see where the need for the raising of our assessment, if we're not collecting money on recyclables and stuff, we'll have to, it costs to get rid of garbage. I guess that's just the reality of it all. They also talked about the landfill in Gently, however it's pronounced. I think I've mentioned this before, the state of Minnesota, or the DNRs, has got, so they're trying to build out to the east. The DNR a couple years ago found some sterile sedge, which, excuse me, they didn't find sterile sedge, but they found other plants that are normally in those same kind of wetlands. So they're trying to identify all that, but in the meantime, that's delaying being able to use those cells for future use. So right now they're working on cell 14. They're preparing cell 15. And of course, you gotta look at a mountain of garbage out there, and they wanna spread it out over time, all the way to cell 20. But if these cells on the end get knocked off, well, now all of a sudden, the cell has to start coming down. So instead of getting so many years out of a cell, you get less years, and all of a sudden, they want us to then start going north, which then needs to have new environmental studies done, GIS stuff done, geography, wells, all this kind of stuff has to be done. But they want to do that in the future instead of now, because we've already got this area that we thought we were gonna be able to fill, but now it looks like we may not be able to totally, and they want to go in a different direction. And the state makes it seem, or the Corps of Engineers makes it seem like we'll just go over here, but then, of course, we know, and the state says, well, you've got to do this and this and this and this and this before you can go there, which that all takes time and money, which we don't want to do that now when we already have this area that we thought was ready to go. Let's see. And then, of course, we talked about, which again, Josh covered, the hauling contract, where I know some of the figures that Josh did some paperwork for had to use the existing contract numbers because we didn't have updated numbers, and the paperwork had to get to the state. So they were at $222 a mile, or $222 for hauling, and it's at $256 now with Duquesne. So there was a difference there. Then I had Dancing Sky Area Agency on Aging, Region 2, and I'm gonna just jump right to what Shar was talking about. Living in Park Rapids is going to be having a dementia, excuse me. A dementia workshop, so expert Tia Snow is going to be there. It's going to be October 6th, and it was going to be at
Faith Bridge Church, I think.
Faith Ridge, there you go, I just found, Faith Ridge Church here in Park Rapids. I think for those people that are gonna be caregivers for people with dementia, I think this would be an excellent thing to attend to. We also covered, of course, this is part of the Older American Act. We went through, we had people there from the Senior Linkage Line, which is a great help source for people, even myself, to call to find out about Medicare and those kinds of things. They talked about signing up for A and B and all those other alphabetical programs that are available with Medicare. They also talked about how if you didn't have, A is covered, but if you don't join, like say B and D, and you decide to join later in the future, well then your rates are gonna be higher because you didn't join when you were 65 as you should have. And some of those can get quite expensive. They talked about a gentleman who was in his 90s and now needs drugs for his, part of his care, but the cost of his getting onto a Plan D now would be too high, so he's just gonna be paying for his drugs out of pocket.
Is it like a 30-day window when you do that?
It's only like a three-month
Oh, window.
there, yeah. So each year, of course, there's a percentage that gets added on. I also have a copy of the 2023 area plan, if any of you are interested in looking at it. You can kind of page through. It shows in areas like where Hubbard County, they've got different graphs and all that, what's proposed to be done in Hubbard County and stuff like that. It's quite informative. Then I had, of course, Northwest Minnesota Juvenile Center. Dan already covered that. And like I had said, I think the work that is done there, it's helping out those juveniles, but there's so many more that fall through the cracks. And I think those juveniles that come out of there, they're getting some life skills, they're getting some some, that we're now serving meals on-site, so there's a course available where they get high school credits and stuff to actually be a part of the kitchen. They get to learn basic things, you know, how to cook meals and stuff like that, things that they're gonna carry them through their lives. And then I had an HRDC meeting, Headwaters Regional Development Commission, and we had Marcus Burning present on the Northwest Regional Emergency Communications Board, which I know I've been up to Thief River with you at one time. It's kind of amazing what Marcus was talking about, the things that go in, you know, where if we call 911, how here in Hubbard County, it gets sent to Beltrami County, and they figure out where it has to go from there. And he talked about, like when the bridge collapsed, 35W bridge collapsed in Minneapolis there, how everybody was there taking pictures and videos and contacting friends and everything and family, but yet then the emergency people couldn't get on because of the system was overloaded. So how they can now bump those people out so the emergency services can get through where they have to. And I guess that was probably the high point. Of course, with HRDC, still trying to get, they're applying for some grants. USDA is a placemaking grant for the Ridgeway neighborhood, Monoman City contract, doing a comprehensive parking study in the city of Bemidji, and we had a staffing update, and I guess that's about it. Yeah, it's like the first half of the month, this month was busy. And if there's nothing else,
I'll move to adjourn.
thank you, Shar. Thank you, David. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Still wanted to meet with Sean.
I do.
How many units does Carolyn have? How many units are over there?
And I waved to